I knew something shady was going on the moment I opened that HOA bill. They tried to charge me 4 times the normal amount, and guess what? By the time this story ends, you will see exactly how I flipped the whole thing on them and made the HOA audit itself. Yeah, their math did not add up, and they picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. It all started 2 months ago. I live in one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods, clean sidewalks, trimmed lawns, and neighbors who wave just enough to look friendly but never actually talk to you. You know the type. And running this suburban empire was our beloved HOA, led by one man who loved power way too much, Mr. Langford, the HOA president. Now, every month I pay a standard $150 HOA fee. It covers the basics: lawn care, pool upkeep, community events, all that stuff. So when I opened my new bill and saw $640, I froze. At first I thought maybe I had missed a payment or there was some kind of late fee. But when I checked, everything was up to date. Then I noticed a new line at the bottom. Community Improvement Fund, $490. Community Improvement Fund? What improvement? We had not voted on anything. No one mentioned any new projects. So, I picked up my phone and called the HOA office. The receptionist answered in that fake cheerful tone, "Homeowner Association office, how may I help you?" I said, "Yeah, I just received my new statement and there is a $490 charge that came out of nowhere. Can someone explain that?" She paused for a second, long enough for me to know she had said this line before, and replied, "Oh, that is for the new neighborhood beautification project." "Beautification project?" I repeated. "When did that happen?" She said, "Oh, it was approved last quarter by the board." I said, "Really?" Because I attend those meetings, and nobody approved anything. Then she gave me that scripted answer again. "You can read about it in the notice we mailed out." Yeah, right. I had read every notice. There was nothing. That was the moment something in me snapped. I work in finance. I deal with numbers all day. So when numbers do not make sense, I find out why. I decided I was going to get to the bottom of this, quietly. I grabbed my laptop, opened a spreadsheet, and started pulling every HOA statement I had saved over the past year. I compared them line by line. Everything looked consistent, until 3 months ago. That was when maintenance fees started doubling. Landscaping jumped from $2,500 to $5,200, and a mysterious vendor named Langford Property Services started appearing. You can probably guess who owned that company. Yep, Mr. Langford's cousin. Now I was fired up. This was not just some bookkeeping error. This was a scam. But I needed proof, and I wanted to see if I was the only one being played. So that evening, I went for a walk around the neighborhood, clipboard in hand. I started casually talking to my neighbors, especially the older ones who paid their bills through checks and probably did not double-check their statements. When I asked if they had noticed the beautification fee, they all looked confused. One guy, Dave, said, "What fund? I just paid the same old thing." Another neighbor said, "Wait, mine was higher too, but I thought it was a mistake." That confirmed it. Some people had been overcharged, others not at all. Langford was picking random houses to squeeze extra cash out of. By the time I finished my walk, I had talked to 12 neighbors. 9 of them had the same $490 charge. None of them were told why. At this point, I was half furious and half excited, because now, it was game on. If Langford wanted to play accountant, I would play auditor. I spent the next few days collecting every invoice, every public record, and every payment receipt the HOA had ever filed. You would be surprised how much information is public when you know where to look. I found out that Langford's cousin's company had been paid over $18,000 for community repairs, but there were no records of any actual repairs happening. The invoices were fake, the descriptions vague, and the checks were all signed by the same 2 board members, Langford and his buddy Carl. It was a clean little operation, until someone like me decided to check the math. Now I had evidence. But before going nuclear, I needed to make sure every piece lined up. So I sent a polite email to the HOA asking for a detailed financial report, pretending to be just another curious homeowner. 3 days later, they sent me a PDF file, full of vague descriptions, missing totals, and zero accountability. They really thought no one would notice. That was their mistake. That was because by the end of this story, Langford and his little empire would fall apart, and I would make sure the entire neighborhood saw the truth. I had the numbers. Next, I was going to expose the fraud, publicly, and I already had the perfect plan. The next morning, I woke up still fuming. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this was not just a mistake. This was a pattern. And if the HOA was pulling this off on me, they were doing it to others too. So, I decided to go full Sherlock mode. I grabbed my coffee, opened my laptop again, and spent the next few hours combing through public records, invoices, and vendor receipts. The thing is, our neighborhood had not changed a single flower bed in over a year. I called up the landscaping company listed on the invoice. The guy who answered said, we stopped servicing your neighborhood 6 months ago. That was the smoking gun. I politely thanked him, hung up, and smiled to myself. This was exactly the kind of thing that would expose them. But I needed to be careful. HOA presidents like Mr. Langford loved control, and he would not go down easy. So, I printed everything. Invoices, receipts, emails, payment trails, and organized it in a binder labeled HOA Audit Report. I even highlighted every suspicious transaction. I wanted this thing to look official enough to scare them, but neat enough that it would be undeniable. A few days later, I requested to speak during the HOA board meeting. Those meetings were usually dull, with 5 people half asleep while Mr. Langford lectured us about property lines and lawn lengths. But not this time. When my turn came, I stood up with my binder in hand. I have some concerns about the new Community Improvement Fund, I said calmly. Mr. Langford looked irritated already. Sir, that matter has already been discussed. Please keep your comments brief. Oh, I will, I said, smiling. In fact, I will make this very simple. Then, I flipped open the binder and started reading off numbers. According to this statement, the HOA paid $2,000 to Langford Property Services. Is that your cousin's company? The room went dead silent. A few heads turned toward him. He stammered. That payment was for approved maintenance. Really? I replied. Because the landscaping company listed on this invoice says they stopped working for our neighborhood months ago. So where exactly did that money go? The other board members started whispering. A woman sitting 2 seats down leaned forward, her eyes wide. Wait, what? She said under her breath. I could see the panic in Mr. Langford's face. He started shuffling papers, mumbling something about miscommunication. Look, I said, flipping another page. I am not saying anyone is stealing, but these numbers do not add up. And before anyone in this room pays another cent, I think we deserve to know where our money is going. The energy in the room shifted completely. People who were usually quiet during meetings started nodding. Someone muttered, "Yeah, we should see those records." Mr. Langford tried to regain control. "We will review this internally," he said, but I was not done yet. "With all due respect, you had your chance to review it internally," I replied. "That is why I did my own review. And if we do not get transparency, I will be filing a formal complaint with the county auditor." He froze. The room went still. Then someone in the back, Mrs. Carter, one of the older homeowners, said, "He is right. We have been paying extra for months. We deserve answers." Within minutes, the meeting turned into chaos. People demanding refunds, questioning fees, asking who approved new expenses. Mr. Langford kept saying, "Everyone calm down," but no one was listening anymore. The power he used to hold in that room evaporated in front of him. After the meeting, he stormed over to me in the parking lot. "You made a scene in there," he said, glaring. I smiled. "No, I just showed math. You made the scene when you started cooking the numbers." He clenched his jaw and walked away without another word. Over the next few days, things got even better. The HOA board announced an emergency audit. They hired an independent accountant to review all financial activity from the past year. And guess what? Every single charge I had flagged turned out to be suspicious or misreported. Word spread fast around the neighborhood. Suddenly, I was getting knocks on my door, neighbors thanking me, some even offering to help gather more paperwork. One guy brought me coffee and said, "Man, you did what we all wanted to do." But while everyone was celebrating, I had a feeling this was not over. People like Mr. Langford do not admit defeat quietly. And sure enough, 2 days later, I got an email from the HOA saying my next payment was late and would include a $75 penalty. That was funny because I had already paid it. I checked my account and saw the transaction cleared. They were trying to mess with me. A petty move, but an obvious one. So, I printed that too. At this point, my binder was thicker than a college textbook, and I was not stopping until Mr. Langford was held accountable. Because when you try to cheat an entire community, you deserve to get audited. Twice. The audit report came back a week after the emergency review started. When the independent accountant emailed the summary to the board, I was sitting at my kitchen table, coffee cooling, waiting like everyone else. The subject line alone made my chest tighten. Audit findings, irregular disbursements identified. When the board opened the meeting to present the findings, the room was packed. People who never came to meetings were there. Teenagers were texting from the back with shocked faces. Mrs. Carter had her knitting in her lap, but she could not stop tapping her foot. You could feel the neighborhood breathing together, like everyone was holding the same secret and finally about to exhale. The auditor walked us through it calmly, line by line. He explained the double payments, the invoices that had no corresponding work, the vendor that had not serviced the community in months yet kept getting paid, and the checks signed with vague approval notes. He used plain language, nothing fancy, because he knew a room full of homeowners should be able to understand their own money. When he said the words everyone wanted to hear, the room reacted like a chorus. There is evidence of improper disbursements. He did not say the word theft. He kept it clinical. But we all knew what he meant. Money had been diverted, and a relative of one of the board members had been on the receiving end. Mr. Langford sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight enough to cause an earthquake. He tried to speak, but every time he opened his mouth, someone in the room would remind him of a specific invoice or a photo I had provided. It was like watching a man try to put out a fire with a single napkin. The board held an immediate vote. It was not pretty. Several members who had been quiet for months suddenly found their voices. Some of them said they had trusted Langford because he had been president for years. Others said they wished they had checked earlier. The motion passed. Langford would be suspended pending further investigation, and his signatory authority on checks would be revoked. When that vote was announced, people cheered. It was not a mean cheer. It was a community cheer. It felt like a neighborhood pulling itself back together. But the real payoff came the next day. The local accountant who had been hired to perform a deeper forensic review called me and said, "You were right to push. The trail leads back further than we thought." He explained that some of the payments had been routed through shell entries and that the HOA had been overbilled repeatedly. He said the county auditor would likely follow up. What I wanted next was simple: transparency and restitution. I did not want drama for drama's sake. I wanted the money back into the community coffers so we could fix the pool pump instead of paying for phantom repairs. At the next homeowner meeting, the board read a resolution that made heads turn. It stated that the HOA would demand repayment for all improperly disbursed funds, that the board would cooperate fully with any legal inquiry, and that the HOA would install new financial controls: dual signatures for checks, regular public posting of invoices, and quarterly financial reviews open to any member. People applauded. Some cried. A man down the row patted my shoulder and said, "You did good, man. You kept your cool and then you worked the numbers." I felt proud and a little tired. Fighting is tiring, but right then it felt worth it. Langford did what a lot of people do when cornered. He offered to resign to avoid further disruption. The board accepted. He left with his box of papers and a stiff smile. I am not going to pretend I felt sorry. I felt relieved. For years, people had been afraid to question him. Now they were not. There were two other outcomes that mattered as much as the resignation. First, the HOA sent refund notices to every homeowner who had been charged the bogus Community Improvement Fund. The notices explained the error and gave options for direct credit or check refund. Second, the board called a community town hall to decide on real priorities: the pool pump, new playground swings, and a proper holiday event budget. People who had been on the sidelines suddenly wanted to help. Volunteers signed up on slips of paper. Kids drew colorful posters for the repairs. The street felt alive in a different way. A few weeks later, the county auditor closed their initial review with a recommendation for restitution. There were no dramatic arrests or daytime TV moments. This was not a movie. This was real life. Langford had taken advantage of trust, and he would be required to repay some of the funds. That was justice, measured and slow, but real. The HOA also changed its bylaws to require clearer voting records for any fee increases. No more silent assessments mailed out with a line item and a bold price. After all of that, life slowed down. The pool pump was fixed. The playground swing creaked in the summer sun, and at the first community barbecue after the audit, neighbors brought potato salad like it was a victory feast. People told stories about how they used to keep quiet. They said they were glad someone finally asked the awkward questions. A few days after the new policies were posted, Mr. Langford came by my house. He looked different. He did not look like the man who had held the HOA gavel for years. He had this hollowness about him, like the guy who realized his empire was built on shaky math. He said quietly, "You were right. I should have been more transparent." He reached into his pocket and handed me a small envelope. Not a check, not a threat, just a note that read, "I am sorry for the trouble I caused." I did not accept the apology with warm hugs. I nodded and said, "We are moving forward. That is what matters." He left. I closed the door, looked at the framed copy of the audit summary on my wall. Yes, I framed it. I am weird like that. And felt a calm that I had not felt in a long time. The whole episode taught me something about small communities. Power can be comfortable. People can let numbers slide because they trust a familiar voice. But trust is not an excuse for secrecy. When people who write the checks can be anyone, the checks need a second pair of eyes. So what is the takeaway? It is simple. If something in your life does not add up, check the math. Do not assume someone else is minding the store. Ask the hard questions. Bring the receipts. Keep cool. Do not make it personal. Make it factual. Numbers do not lie when you force them into the light. A few months later, when the neighborhood association hosted a ribbon cutting for the new playground bench, I gave a short, awkward little speech. I said, "We fixed the pool. We got the swings. We did it together." People laughed and clapped. Then I finished with the line I had been rehearsing the whole time. Their math did not add up, so I audited them. That is how we got our money back. It was short. It felt honest. And when I said it, a few kids behind me shouted, "You are the audit guy!" That made everyone laugh. So yeah, their math did not add up. But by checking the numbers, by asking neighbors to wake up and care, by keeping a cool head and a thick binder, the neighborhood recovered not just money but trust. And honestly, that is the best kind of return on investment.